Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's like coming home again. I started my career in the fire service here at Winter Haven Fire Department back in '94. I worked a year. It was a good year. And then I came to Orlando. I worked with Don Galletto over here. He was at Polk County EMS, and we came on together in Orlando. So this is like home, and I truly like Polk County and like just consider it an honor to stand before you and to speak today. Just a show of hands, as I look at the audience, because I've given this presentation in different settings. The number of first responders, like fire personnel. Can I see a show of hands of fire personnel? Okay. Nurses, okay. Emergency operations, administration type people. Anybody? Okay. All right. Emergency management. Yeah, emergency management. I want to make sure, and I would like to throw this disclaimer out, because this presentation is definitely geared towards the command level for what we saw from a command side. Not necessarily what Dr. Hunter's going to cover a little more on the medical side for me. He'll cover that, but we'll definitely hit what we did, protocols, and how we go about our business. So you hear some audio and some visual components of this to see exactly how the scene's set up and some of the things we went through, and some of the changes we made as a result of that. But again, as was stated earlier, I am the Fire Chief, City of Orlando. Been with the city almost 22 years, and have been the Fire Chief the last 2 years. And it's been a wonderful 2 years. These past 2 years as Fire Chief, I got a chance to experience this along with our team as far as the Pulse Nightclub. It was a horrific event, but nonetheless, we made it through, and we still continue to build on what we experienced that night. Just a general overview for discussion. Department overview, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the history of active shooter, previous active shooter training throughout the nation. Just to give you a little overview how it kind of all started and where we're at today. The incident itself in 4 phases, and the Emergency Operations Center. Probably it's a small segment, but it's probably one of the biggest segments, portion of this whole piece that, even though the incident ended in 4 to 6 hours, the Emergency Operations Center was open for another 2 weeks. Then the Family Care Center was actually still open today, but it's been open almost a year now. So it's been an ongoing process dealing with the victims, their families, and some of the services that was given to them during that process. And then we'll talk a little bit about lessons learned. There's always lessons learned, the things that we learn as an agency, as a community, that as we go forward, hopefully, if it ever happens again, hopefully it never is, but if it does, we hope we're more prepared. Little thing about Orlando, if you don't know, it's right up the street of I-4. If you've never been there, it's right there up the street. According to Ford magazine, it's the coolest, one of the coolest cities, nightlife, you name it, we all been there. We got a strong mayor form of government. Mayor Dyer has supported public safety since day one. Since his 16 years in office, he's never cut public safety. He's given, I'm a little spoiled. The fire department and the police department has been taken care of pretty well. So definitely appreciate Mayor Dyer and the commissioners and the city administrators for supporting that. Had about 3,300 employees, $1.2 billion annual budget, and a population right about 265, but during the daytime hours, we swell up to close to 500,000 to 700,000. It depends where it is. Orlando Airport, we bring in about 66 million visitors throughout Orlando a year. 45,000 come through the airport alone. So we definitely have a large tourist population that we service every day, and bulk of our calls are dealing with those patrons, those clients. Orlando Fire Department, 17 stations, run about 57,000 calls a year, 20,000 transport. And we've just been transporting for the last 6 years. So transport to us, forward transport is new. We got like a 70-30 split. We do 70% of the transport, all ALS, and AMR, or Rural Metro, does the other 20%, 30%, I'm sorry. We got about 592 authorized strength of personnel. And we've been around 132 years. A little general overview of the department, org chart. So in that, I have 3 deputy chiefs, myself, PIO, you name it, I think we got it. Dive team. Let me go back to something. This is something I want to say. If you look at us as far as accreditation, ISO, EMAP, and LEED certification, our Emergency Operations Center is accredited. Our fire department itself is accredited. Our dispatch is accredited. So when I say we kind of check the box, we've done all those things. But the biggest thing I would press upon anybody today is training. You can have all this stuff laid out, listed out, but if you don't train, you don't practice, you don't develop your people, when these situations happen, that they have to fall back on that training. So I would say that personnel fell back on that training that was given them over the years. You got this stats from FBI, whether you know it or not. The active shooter situation has been going on a long time, since according to FBI. Since 2000 to 2013, we had 160 incidents, about 11.4 a year, of which about 1,000 casualties. Of that, 486 was killed and about 557 wounded. Just in a 13-year span, we had over 160 active shooters in the United States, according to FBI sources. So it's not uncommon. It's just a question of when and where would it happen. We can look overseas. It's happened more frequently, more common than ever. You go overseas just 2 days ago. So it's becoming a commonplace, and I know all the agencies in this room are preparing for such events if it happens in your area. When Columbine happened, just a little recap, Columbine happened in '99, 13 people killed, everybody was shocked, we was all concerned, and we just like, wow, that was an isolated incident. Aurora happened at the movie theater. Again, could it happen here? It didn't. We thought about it because since then, before then, we had our own incident in Orlando in 2009 at the Gateway shooting. Again, a disgruntled employee came into the office building, killed one, injured 5, left the scene. Our units got on scene, looking around. We didn't have ballistic vests. We did our normal protocol. We staged 2 or 3 blocks away, and we waited for PD to clear the scene. Since then, we began more intensive training to get our personnel ready for an active shooter. UCF had a near miss. A student was disgruntled around 2013. He was ready to firearms. He had cocktail. He was ready to but fortunately for him, for us, the gun jammed when he began to do his initial attack, and he ended up, since the gun jammed, he freaked out. He ran into the bathroom and killed himself. So that was the only reason that plot got spoiled. Post-training that we did for the department, we implemented MCI training in Orlando in 2005 after the Gateway shooting, before the Gateway shooting. And we worked with Orange County, worked with SO, PD, active shooter training. So you name it, we tried to do it to the best of our abilities, work with the mall, all the hot areas in the city that we felt like if it's a potential threat, this is the area we need to work in. And at that point, we had about 92% of our department trained, actively trained, engaged, ready to go. But again, we only had the one incident. So everybody was still like, okay, it was an isolated incident. It can't happen. Went a little step further, kept training and kept training. So you can look at all the incidents that we had of training since 2013. We have put on a lot of full active training with multiple agencies in our community, partnering agency, Joint Response, Orange County Sheriff, you name it, OPD. We had everyone there working together since 2005, I would say, in multiple training sessions. June 12th happened. Everybody knows it was a Saturday night, Sunday morning. We had just had the other incident that night where the singer was killed by a lone gunman. So it was like, okay, that was a blur. What happens? And then this happened. The nightclub layout. Have you had the opportunity to see it? I'm sure everybody either rode by it or saw it on TV. Older nightclub, typical construction, 1957 construction, been remodeled hundreds of times. It's a 2-story club, about 5,000 square feet, occupancy and load about 300 at the time of the incident. Just to give you a little direction from where it is, here's the nightclub. Here's the fire station less than 150 meters away, we say about a block. And the level 1 trauma center, the only one in the Central Florida area, if I'm right, Dr. Hunter, the only one in the area is less than 4 blocks away, about 4 blocks away when you think about it. So if you had a silver lining in this whole incident was a close proximity to the hospital. because of the close proximity, I think a lot of lives were saved that night just for the close proximity. Had it been 20, 30 miles away from the hospital or 15 on the south side of town, it would have been probably a different outcome with some of those victims. But we were so close to the hospital, and there was a level 1 trauma hospital that was ready and equipped to handle that many people at that short amount of time. This layout of the club, if you look at this back door right here, the assailant parked his apparatus, this vehicle right here. As he came into the club about 2 a.m. in the morning, he came in right here, calls transparent. He came in shooting right away. The club had about 300 people in the club at the time. We had one off-duty officer working the club that evening. And normally at that time of night when an officer is working, since it's towards the end of the closing, he or she is outside, just making sure the patrons are moving along swiftly. So as he entered the club, the gunman, he came in shooting. The club was still packed. And the officer came behind him, returning fire to try to mitigate the hazard, if you will. Multiple calls were called in at the time. We got audio, right? Let's see if we got audio. Call came in at 2:05. The first company officer on the scene at Station 5, this is his opening transmission to dispatch. Let me start it over. Can you turn up?
Okay, are you advising you're with a patient, but you're not able to leave?
Negative. We've got multiple shootings going on outside. People are running everywhere. Polk and Orange and Taylor. We're seeking shelters by the station. There's multiple shootings going on. Hold the units up at Gore and Orange.
Check. We can't get down past there with it being closed anyway. So we'll stage. We're going to come across division. And we'll stage there.
So what you heard, I mean, caught the tail end. There was initial Station 5 crew had just left the Pulse Nightclub about 30 minutes earlier for an unconscious patient. They transported the patient, came back to the station. They were stocking supplies at the station. The lieutenant all of a sudden heard multiple gunshots. And then all of a sudden, if you look at where Station 5 is here, it's a bay window. It's a bay window, it's a window, I should say, that points directly south to the club. So as he hearing the shots, he look out, all he see is people running at the time. He didn't know friend from foe, if you will, and he heard gunshots. So at that point, he's calling dispatch on the phone, let them know hearing shots, and they are hunkering down, they are staying in place. And a few minutes later, as he was on the phone, on the radio on the phone to dispatch, all he heard was knock at the door. He had people running, screaming, and he didn't know who was friend from foe. So protocol-wise, he stayed in place, he hunkered down, he didn't let anybody in the station until a law enforcement got on the scene to confirm that it was somewhat safe. Again, so that's kind of where we picked up at right there. Initial dispatch came in, and then as the first units get on scene, this is a dispatch from the commanding officer.
Metro 165, Rescue 1, Rescue 2, Rescue 11, yourself in District 2.
Just one copy.
Squad. Orlando District 1, we have several patients that are attempting to leave the scene. There's a separate patient at the 711, 1823 South Orange Avenue. A gunshot wound to the abdomen.
Rescue 7, District 1. We're at Orange. Caleb, can you just respond? Place Rescue 11.
Oh, yes, stand by. Orlando, if you would, link my door and see and let them know what's going on. They're probably going to have a lot of walking wounded that are going to arrive right up their front door. Rescue 7, go ahead and ask yourself. Orlando, total rescue count 5. We're adding Rescue 7.
Check. Orlando Rescue 7, also be advised, Engine 5 is on lockdown at the station. They have active shooting in the area. Don't proceed into that scene.
Copy, we're show us in the area on scene.
Rescue 7.
Just want to Rescue 7. We're all staged at Orange and Gore. Just make sure you're not in that area where the active shooting is occurring, which is right there at Taylor. Copy, Mr. Well, we ended up inadvertently driving here. We're with OPD. They're covering us right now. We're in a safe area. Check.
So as you hear the transmission, Rescue 7 had just left ORMC, the hospital, RHS, I keep saying RMC, but just left the hospital right here. And as they were traveling south to Orange Avenue, they encountered active shooting, well, not active shooting, but patrons running from the club, people screaming, and the fire station is locked down. Of course, at this time, you got to keep in mind all the law enforcement officers that's responding to the scene. And we talking about hundreds of cop cars from ATF, FBI, you name it, everybody was coming to the scene. The initial units for us was staged, don't see it here, but Gore and Orange, another 2 blocks up the street here, at least 2 blocks. Probably, let me see, Underwood, probably close to 3 blocks here, and the station is here. So you look at the close proximity, so that one lone rescue and engine 5, station 5 was in the middle of that war zone. So as the situation unfolded, we know we had one victim right here at the 7-Eleven at the time. And again, you had those other patrons running outside the club. They're screaming, and you saw it on the video. Our initial unit, as we came through, initial staging area was here, as I stated, and it came down to the first triage area and the OFD command post. We established command just east of the club, or just across from the fire station. And from that, Einstein Bagel was probably the triage one. We had 2 victims we know for a fact there was DOA on the scene right there, that they had to leave those 2 bodies there. Then we had the countless other patients walking either at the hospital or at the fire station at the time. Something that came up, let me make sure I just went. So initial, a lot of talks about, we had established a command with OPD, is one of the things I would say for law enforcement. The initial officer on the scene commandeered the nearest sergeant on the scene, I think it was a sergeant or lieutenant at the time, and they began initial unified command right there at that place until law enforcement big command bus came on scene. But the initial command post was just right there at the 7-Eleven. Hot zone, typical response. It was a mass casualty situation that had an active shooter component to it, to a hostage situation. The first 3 to 4 minutes, 5 minutes of the scene was an active shooter situation because we knew we had gunfire, but the gunfire had stopped since then. But what we did know that based on the radio reports from law enforcement, we had a hostage situation. We had people inside, had the gunman inside with those patrons at that point. And over the next 42 minutes, ORMC, if I'm not correct me wrong, received 38 trauma patients, Dr. Hunter, to that effect, and they was able to galvanize all their staff, the doctors from the neighboring hospital, the hospital community, right, their network, surgeons, operating rooms, and I could be wrong with some of the stats, but so it was a total team effort to help mitigate and control this situation. And the biggest component was at this time, not only just what was going on in the club, but the hospitals. We had to have a hospital in close proximity to deal with the number of patrons that from driving up from PD, from fire, as well as there was a walking wounded component of it. And then at the patients that's already in the hospital is coming from other areas. So it was a total collaborative effort to get this situation somewhat under control. We had more than 20 apparatus, 70 fire person EMS from Orlando and Orange County helping out in this situation at the time. And as you notice, we had 2 triage areas, one right across from the Einstein Bagel because we had the 2 victims that we know was dead at the time. And we had multiple patients right here in this area. We had another triage area here and trying to get them to the hospital. And again, like anything else, if you can imagine, you see it on TV, the war zones and see those different things. That's what you saw here. It was dark, cop cars everywhere. Everybody had automatic weapons. You had patrons that was very frightened and upset. And then, when I say blood and what, you name it, it was there. And then you had the hospital, and some people who knew the area knew the hospital was close, so they self-transported. And then you had law enforcement coming in and out. I mean, it was a chaotic scene. Some of our partner agents with Joint Response Orange County Fire, they sent multiple units, 3 captains, 11 rescues. So at the end of the day, we had a lot of units on scene, waiting, transporting, treating. You're talking about abdominal wounds, you name it, we had it. It was all kind of wounds there on the scene. And I give our team a lot of credit for dealing and processing that, and also trying to manage the crews and their expectation of what they was dealing with at the time. Orphan command post, the number of units we had on scene, just a simple command, how we command our unit, command our scenes. We had one commander, District 1 was assuming command, AC1 assumed support. He worked with them to help manage that situation. We had triage, transport, and all these different areas set up in all the different units. So we were ready to go for units and for patients throughout the whole process, administering ALS care and BLS care, as well as any other tactical component as far as helping out with law enforcement. And then as the scene unfolded, it was about 2:56 a.m. and they notified the emergency operations manager. But I want to point out something to you. At this point in the situation, you went from an active shooter, now we deal with a hostage situation. When you deal with a hostage situation, we knew we had at least 15 to 20 patrons in the club or more at that time, and people still, and law enforcement still bringing people out as they can. One of the things law enforcement asked us to have rescue would begin to ladder a building for SWAT, so they can set up around that building and see if they can get a good shot and get a good view. And I asked myself, we couldn't figure out why they wanted to set up at the Dunkin' Donuts, but all the cops wanted us to ladder. Just joke. Just a little joke. But they did. We did actually ladder Dunkin' Donuts. SWAT got on top of the donut shop, and it was good. We laughed about it then, but it was funny. Around 3 a.m., and I think this is where some of the things that happened. Again, I want to tell you this is from a command perspective. We had a unified command with law enforcement commandeering that first officer that was on the scene, using the intel that we was gathering at the time, and we had a command post just right here. But I would tell you, anytime for the chiefs in the room, law enforcement made a decision to say, you know what, this is not the best area for us to be as far as managing this scene. At that point, we had two scenes going on. Our company officer determined, hey, we are in the best spot for us. This is a triage, a mass casualty incident. We're going to stay where we at and let law enforcement go down. And once they did that, as you saw, everyone's here, law enforcement moved here across from Dunkin' Donuts, Pulse Nightclub is here, our command stayed here. I can tell you what happened right away on that. Communication began to get hampered, right? Things began to break down. But the command at the time was thinking, how can I manage both? So what he did, he commandeered an officer next to him to help translate and help get information from both sides of the fence. Around 3:21 a.m., and Dr. Honey, you can confirm this, they had a cold silver. Is that the proper term? Yeah. Yep, cold silver at the hospital. They thought, again, you got a lot of hysterical people at the hospital. They thought they had the shooter at the hospital, and the hospital went down for a brief lockdown. I want to say a brief lockdown. Did not hamper operations, but it went down for a brief lockdown, realized that it was not true. So treatment services started right back up. I think somebody said shots were fired. So there was a lot of stuff going on because everybody was just frantic. So now law enforcement is going towards the hospital to try to stop this. If it's another shooter, turned out to be anything, nothing. So that was just another exercise in futility, if you will. But OPD and ORMC staff, I think it was minutes before they cleared the scene. It was really quick that they realized it was a false claim. But what I realized about this, and we found out something about this. We have an 800 radio system and realized that we have radios all over the place. And at some point in that situation, in that incident, people were picking up radios and transmitting what they felt was necessary. So it was one point where we had to go find out who's transmitting from the hospital, who's talking on the radio, who's saying this about patients and victims, because it wasn't Orlando or Orange County. And so we had a representative from Orange County and with the hospital staff locate that individual, get the radio from them, because everybody wanted to say something on the radio. It was a lot going on. I mean, it was a lot going on, you can imagine. So during the second transition period, about 3:40 a.m., OPD, we got intel for about an EOD response. Realized, okay, the assailant had a flight jacket on. It was said he had ammunition, ballistic vest. So as they went around, they brought dogs. They got in his vehicle. His vehicle was parked on this side of the club. So they got a hit from his vehicle that, okay, it's possible explosive at this time. So now our whole mindset changed again. It went from a active shooter, EOD response, active shooter, hot situation, which is still going on hostage. Now we got an EOD response. And according to our protocol, once we go to EOD response, we got the bomb team on scene along with the Orange County bomb team. We staged 2 blocks away. But I would tell you, from here to there is not 2 blocks away. You could not move all those patrons, all those victims, and begin moving. We tried our best to try to move people around, but I would tell you, once we realized it was a potential explosion, we have protocols in place that we must try to adhere to. So we tried our best to try to move things around, and it did not work as planned. Bomb scene, we had all the units out there right across. So as things unfold, 4:25 a.m., between 4:25 and 5 a.m., things begin to slow down. We know we had a hot situation head on. We had the bomb threat going on. The hospital gave us opportunity to revamp, get all our supplies together. All our personnel was standing around. Now they recharged. We went from all these patients transporting, and now everything was a lull between 4:25 and 5 a.m. And everybody was just recharging, trying to catch their breath. Hospital, this picture depicts exactly what the hospital looked like. We had gurneys, everything's outside waiting for this next wave of patients. Intel has told us that we had at least 15 to 20 people inside the club right now. We did not know how they would end, but we wanted to make sure we had things in place so as those patrons came out, we'd be ready to treat and transport. About 5 a.m., I think it's 5:02, this is kind of what, when you look at the picture, what happened. OPD, law enforcement did explosive breach in those walls to get to those victims and start bringing patients out and actually to apprehend the suspect, kill the suspect. So at 5 a.m., SWAT teams, Pulse, another 12, 15 hostages came out of the club. OPD, hazards team, I got 2 different numbers, but yeah, came out of the club and the suspect was down. And during that exchange, I will tell you, when they made the decision to go and get that, to go inside to get those victims, it had already been a couple of hours. Negotiation talks had broken down or whatever with the assailant. Once they made a decision, say we're going in after the bad guy, some of our personnel, if you haven't heard, we didn't know, because we commandeered an officer instead of listening to the SWAT TAC and not having a commander right there at the time. Did not know the explosive breach was going to happen. We knew it about 30 seconds, a minute before it happened, by the time it filtered down. But by the time you give that information out to the troops, it was a little delay, and of course, a little people got startled. But once the explosive happened, people came out, suspect down. Now we had another 15 to 20 people to deal with. And when they came out, you can imagine their state of mind. You can imagine how they was feeling. But overall, it was a good operation. Of the bomb, so as the scene began to go on, the scene kept going on, we still had to deal with explosive breach and explosive ordnance problem. We still had to clear the club. We still had to clear the suspect victim. That went on for another couple of hours. Even though the suspect was down, we still had a job to do on the EOC side and still had to manage our side. So that went on for another couple of hours. Turned out he just had ammunition in his vehicle, and on him was just a flight jacket and some wiring. As appeared, he was strapped with a bomb. Did not actually find one. But you treated it the same nonetheless. So as we got on scene, one of the things that was asked of me and the mayor and everybody wanted to know, how many victims did we have that was transported to the hospital? And I will tell you, this is where the EMS stuff, we had no idea. We had no idea. We tried the triage tag. We tried every little thing you can to try to track victims. But in a ward zone, I'm going to use the word ward zone, it was virtually impossible. The first crews began to tag, but when they pulled up to pick up one patient, 6 more jump on. You know, just then law enforcement, as they encountered patients, they were just taking them down to the hospital because the hospital was only 4 blocks away. They can drop off and go right back into the hot zone. Drop off, go right back into the hot zone. So as sat down and talked to Dr. Hunter, and he said, well, let's look at some video. I want to say you looked at countless hours of video to find out how many patients actually was transported to the hospital. We had no idea. We just knew we were transporting a lot, and our team, our crews were just going, load and go. It was quick. So as you look at the breakdown, maybe these numbers changed, I think. But when y'all looked at it, ORMC received 46 people. Is that correct, Doc? Okay. Of the 46, OFD, we transported 15. OPD, that's according to my latest stats. The cops transported 17. So when I said, you know, you talking about as they encountered people and they was in their squad cars, they just take them. They had a pickup truck. They was using any means necessary to get people to the hospital. And honestly, and is it a fault? We had triage right there. Instead of them stopping at triage, they just drop them at the hospital. It was just that kind of scene. Metro, Orange County, we had a couple of neighboring hospitals that received a couple of patients. But I would say in that short amount of time, ORMC received that many trauma patients. I mean, critical patients. Had we been 15, 10 miles away, it'd have been a different story. But because of the close proximity, it's just a silver lining in that we were able to save a lot of lives that day because of the hospital. But it took us 6 weeks of footage, well, at least 6 weeks of footage, to figure out how many people was actually transported so we can get an accurate count. We knew what we had in the club. We knew the victims that was in the club. But we had no idea was here. And I would say something about the club. And we had a lot of talk about going in and doing assessment to those victims in the club. And Dr. Hunter and Dr. Rawls was on the scene. And I think it was Dr. Rawls said, you know, 4 hours after the victim been gunshot wound to the head, they can still survive. So one of the things we thought about it, honestly, it was a lot of conversation about going in and assessing those patients in the club that we knew bodies were stacked up. We knew stuff was happening in the club. How do we go about doing it? We got docs some level A trauma, level A hazmat suits to get them ready, everything. FBI shut it down. They said, not right now. We'll go and reassess these individuals. But just from the sheer trauma and their assessment, we knew that those injuries were incompatible with life at that time. But I would give Dr. Hunter and Dr. Rawls a lot of credit. Their willingness, I think Dr. Rawls, willingness to go in and assess those victims and try to get them out. Because it had been already it was about 6 in the morning then. It was about 6 o'clock in the morning. And, you know, you can hear the cell phone ring and you can hear all the eerie things if you heard. It was definitely going on. But the docs, we want to go in and see, hey, maybe it's somebody still living, somebody's still alive. But based on the description and the scenes of death and what the trauma to the bodies, it would have been a truly a miracle that anybody survived because of the caliber of handgun he had, a rifle, assault weapon he had, and the handgun he used on those victims. And you got to keep in mind, this person was deliberate in his actions. As he shot people, it was not just a casual shot. He was deliberate in his actions. As he went back and made sure they were dead. So he just not just shoot one time. He came back, either headshots, chest shot. He was just that deliberate. So I give a lot of credit to the hospital and Dr. Hunter and his colleagues for their willingness to go back in. We all want to go back in, but FBI said, no, we'll go back in and check as it was processing the scene. So I think that need to be said. Initial responding agencies, when I said everybody besides the CIA was there, everybody was there on the scene. FBI, ATF, it was, you had to, I don't give it justice, that many officers was there on scene that night. and that we dealt with throughout the whole incident. Emergency Operations Center, as you know, at 2:05, 3:30 a.m., we got a report from it. But I would tell you right here, this was probably one of the biggest things as the scene began to settle down. All the victims, we knew they was in the club. All the other victims that was alive were already transported. This became one of the biggest things. Before we did a press conference, before we did anything, we had established a couple things. The 1-800 number, we had to get people to the EOC Operations Center, get it up and running, truly up and running, because now everything went from the actual scene to the emergency operations scene. And this became a hub for at least 2 weeks, and then it transitioned to a family care center, center, which was at the Amway Center, the Camping World Stadium. I think that's what it was, yeah. So this is something else. EOC operations, so some of the things we had to provide for those victims that as a fire chief, you think, man, we got to help. This falls under my wheelhouse. So my team, we work with the city staffers to deal with family assistance centers, the healthcare, Red Cross, travel, lodging, you name it, we've done it. But before that, I would tell you something, I think Dr. attests to this. When we sent a chief officer from both PD as well as fire down to ORMC to let the loved ones know that their loved ones didn't make it. As we did all that, we also had to deliver bad news, because everybody was hoping it wasn't their child, it wasn't their son or daughter. And the team that I sent down there, it's probably one of the toughest things they ever had to do, to sit there and tell them. And we did it multiple times. We did it at the Beardall Center. And if you can hear screams, you can hear the air come out of the room. But it was one of those things that you'll never forget, because we found ourselves repeatedly in these uncomfortable situations delivering bad news. That they was hoping. We had one John Doe in the hospital, and I think the whole room, about 200 people, was hoping it was their child. And I think the hospital finally identified, and you know, it was just the rest of it. It was just a horrific couple of days dealing with that aftermath that we don't always talk about. As we look at the club, getting the victims out, what we discovered as I pick up the pace here, we go back. That's a good shot. Because of the high media presence, we had to take the bodies out in the cover of the night, use all those things to get the volume out, because everybody wanted to try to get in. Along with Orange County Fire and the medical examiner officer, they was able to move those bodies out in the cover of darkness in a decent manner without exposing too much of the press to it. Post-incident, I give a lot of credit to former President Obama, the mayors, Governor Scott, former FBI Director James Comey, you name it, everybody came through and wanted to talk to the first responders, wanted to talk to see how we were doing, but along with the victims, the hospital, I mean, it was very open. We had opportunity to meet with James Comey, FBI Director 101 at the First Baptist Church, where he actually sat down. He just wanted to know how we were doing at first responders. It was a great, along as the Attorney General. So we had a lot of private settings with those individuals from Washington, from all over, that it meant a lot to all of us, from the hospital to all of us. So it was a nice picture. I'm gonna remember this picture because he's no longer in that role, so I gotta hold on to that picture. This is probably the biggest one carrying for on. Right after the incident, we set up debriefing for our teams, our staff, and see if they was okay, take them off trucks. We didn't take them off trucks right away. And that's one thing, as you think about it, at 6 o'clock in the morning, one of the complaints for one of the guys, like, we just finished that, and we went on the Band-Aid call. And they, you know, just a simple call, and they were not thinking, and know where we were still immersed in that, and you had both commanders who had just worked the scene all night. We were here working, and then those units went right back to work and started working. And then they went on some mundane call. It's not a mundane call, but at this point it was. It was something that was so simple, and they was just like not even processing it. And if you want to say drop the ball, we definitely missed the mark on that, because those individuals, even though they said it was all right, should have came off the trucks right away. But we were all over the place, spread thin. That scene went all the way to about 6, 7 in the morning. So as things went back in place, we were still processing. The next shift was coming on at 8 o'clock, 7:30. So we had a lot of support from Boston, New York. A lot of people came down and helped us out, and it's been an ongoing process. Comfort dogs, you name it. All those things are still going on. We have a peer support team that we started that's really kicked off. There's nothing else. Our CISM team, but our peer support is an ongoing process. We're still reaching out to our people, actually this week, because it's coming up on the anniversary. We're constantly reaching up to them, talking to them. We had another debriefing 2 weeks ago to bring those crews back in to talk about what they did and see how we can improve upon those things. Business reopened. Since the Pulse, we did a lot of training since then. We did a tactical emergency casualty care training, 16-hour course, threat assessment, trying to get our people back up, get them ready just in case it happens again. We said it wouldn't happen again. We had 2 incidents in Orlando since. Lessons learned, for me, implementing. What we realized, anybody still got pages in here in the county? You got pages? Got pages? Yeah, we still got them. Okay. We're in the process of redoing our whole CAD system, and it's been a long process. It's been taking 5-6 years to get to it. These pages failed us on that night. Command staff got paged late. They paged it, but we had 4 dispatchers, and I give dispatch a lot of credit. It was a dispatcher only had 4 working at night. So when all the calls came in and all these things started happening, this is the last thing on their mind to make sure you get a page to the senior staff and all those different things. It was a failed system in that. So we implemented some things as far as communicating any big incident that, you know, if you have not heard from command staff responding on scene, that's a phone call follow-up. Radio channels. We had issues with radio channels we talked about earlier. We had a lot of people jumping on radio tax and want to give their side and want to give you what was going on. We talked about family care, that hotline information. That took a little while to get everything set up with our TM and get all those things in place. So those kind of things beforehand, having those things ready, would definitely save a lot of time. One of the things we point out is the hot situation EOD response. It went from active shooter, and everybody said, well, your ballistic vest was. I can tell you right now, it was an active shooter before we got there. By the time we got things established, it was a hot situation, a mass casualty incident. And then we started treating patients, and then it went to an EOD response. Now we're trying to back up and still treat. So it was a very fluid scene. Since then, we talked with law enforcement, Chief Mina and his guys, about making sure we understand the role of unified command and what unified command means to us. We realize there's a disconnect between law enforcement and fire. Law enforcement work in silos. They come on scene, they're one officer, he or she's going to maintain that scene until the next higher officer come there. Fire department, a little different. We gather, we like a football team. Let's get the plan together, let's go in, let's do it. Law enforcement, the first officer on scene, it could be a patrol officer, it could be a sergeant. He or she is commanding that scene, that's how it goes. Law enforcement, fire is not so much. So we've been working with SWAT since then, working on those lines of communication. If it happens again, this is how we come together, and this is the role. But also equipping our personnel, our managers, is that, okay, you insert yourself in the command booth. Law enforcement is not going to ask you to come in. A lot of things, the command at the time, it was a level of comfort. Do I just walk into the command booth with all these cops? Yes, you do. You're the highest ranking fire person on the field at the time. You walk in, insert yourself. They don't care. They're going to do their part. They want you to do yours. So that's some of the things we have many ongoing discussions, is trying to figure out if it ever happen again, this is our role and this is what we'll do. Even though we trained together for years, we realized something. I look around this room, Chief Walker here, a lot of our senior guys have left since we did that type of training. And a lot of our chiefs today are young, 2, 3 year chiefs in their role. So a lot of things we had to go back and retrain our personnel on. But it did not affect operation. At the end of the day, we still had a plan in place. The guys did a phenomenal job. Since then, October 1, we initiated the Tactical Emergency Casualty Care course. Every person has been trained in it. SAVE program, we've done that. We actually, in April 2017, just last month now, we put ballistic vests on every seat apparatus on the department. Everybody has ballistic vests. The commanding officers, the responding districts have extra vests as well as helmets. So it's about 99%, but 99% of the department is trained in emergency casualty care. They all had a 15, 16-hour course, and they have certification to go along with that. So we continue to train our personnel to make sure it's just not of active shooter, but scenes of violence. We run on scenes of violence all the time, between stabbings or whatever, you name it. And when Officer Deborah Clayton got shot, that was a great time. Our crews came on the scene, put the ballistic vest on, they was ready to respond, they was ready to deal with what was going on. So we have multiple scenes, not just of that nature, but scenes of violence. So we're teaching our personnel that when scenes of violence come in our protocol, you go to your vest, you put this on, you prepare. So that is the mantra we stand on now as far as training. Let's shout out to the hospital, lessons learned. I would tell you right now, if you don't have this, the relationship from the hospital starts before any incident. We have a great working relationship with our hospital leaders, the doctors, Dr. Hunter, all this staff. We have a great relationship. So when this happened, it was flawless. It was things happened. They knew their role. They had faith in us, and things happened accordingly. We had the utmost confidence in ORMC and their staff of doctors that gave. I mean, it was a lot of heroes in the hospital, from the janitor to you name it. Everybody participated. Everybody helped. It was just not about the nurses and the doctor. Everybody was helping the security guard. It was a total effort that galvanized the community. What worked well for us? Leadership support, community partnership, preparedness, and we talked about those. That worked well for us because we had the relationships already established, and because of those relationships, things worked well on that scene. Room for improvement, we realized something because it was a heavy Spanish club, heavy Spanish populated nightclub that night. It was need for translators. As things began to unfold, their family that was calling in, a lot of them didn't speak English. So we had limited translators in that role. So think about that. If you have a Spanish community, Haitian community, whatever those things are, if you need translator, you need to have those on standby, ready to go, more so. Generic PIO message. The city galvanized, they brought all the PIOs together. It was one message. They didn't want to have multiple PIOs, fire, police, public work. Everybody had a message. Everybody had some role in it. But we tried to have one message. And we learned that from other agencies. They were saying that anything they had to do, Aurora and those other places, to have one message. So we pride ourselves on trying to have one message. The CAO office demanded it. We had one message that came from all the PIOs set in one area and crafted the message. It was not just individuals. So good. Little lawn memorial, if I go through it, and I'll wrap up. Kind of things we did with some of the visuals and stuff that we did. It was we coming up on the anniversary. We're expecting large crowds on June 12th. We're preparing for that. Behind the scene in light, what just happened in London and France all the years. So we are preparing for not necessarily the worst, but you never know. So we're not going to be ignorant to it could happen again here. So any questions, comments for me while I'm here? I am more than willing to ask. Yes, sir.
What was the number one thing that just absolutely went wrong?
The number one thing that went wrong, operational side, I would just say the command post, with the unified command. I would say, when I say it went wrong, because the commander on the scene did not insert himself in the command booth. He decided to stay here and allow law enforcement to move in a different area. So as those key information, because SWAT operates on different tack, a secure attack. So when it was making those tactical decisions that affect our personnel, he should have been there, hearing those decisions, and then relaying that information. But he felt commandeering a patrol officer, I think it was a sergeant at the time, was helping him out, but it was a disconnect. So if I had to give number one thing, but he made a decision based on what he was experiencing. And we always say this, when you think about, they always tell you, are you on the dance floor, you're on the dance floor, you're on the balcony. But he was sitting in the middle of the war zone. All these people, he was helping, he was being a liaison for the commander at the time. So he found himself emotionally engaged, where he should have removed himself at the time and been more of that. So if I had to give one thing that I would say is that. But other than that, as far as treatment, transport, we do that in our sleep. It was a mass. We can do that. That is not an issue. Our crews performed flawless. They was great. They did exactly what they did. There was a bunch of heroes as far as I'm concerned. But if I had to put my finger on one thing, I'll say that is it.
Was there ever an issue with equipment on scene as far as like tourniquets, trauma bandages, and stuff like that?
But we did realize something. You got to look at your mass casualty trailer more so than we did at the time. When we pulled out some of the mass casualty, straps for the backboards and stuff, it was old, withered. It was just those kind of things, and getting those things to the scene. We had some astute chiefs that knew you're going to need that and brought it on their own. Because once those commanders got on the scene, yes, they called for additional resources as far as units and stuff. But the mass casualty, one of the chiefs asserted themselves, say, you know what, I need to bring that. And he brought it. So when you're saying equipment, I think that was probably the biggest one. Some of the equipment was a little old, but it didn't hamper operation. At the time the ballistic vest came up, the commander on the scene made a decision we didn't need it based on how fluid the scene was. So, but equipment overall, no, nothing really, other than
What I noticed was, of all the agencies, there was one private, Rural Metro. In your opinion, what could private agencies do to better prepare for these MCIs that we're seeing more of?
Because it's a mass casualty, we bring all the private agencies in, but most of the time our training is just fire, police. What we need to do is invite them to the party, make sure they're on the same page with us, and that's a good point. I want to say our last couple of trainings since then, we had probably no private agency, it was just strictly us again. But we all work with the hospitals and stuff, but not necessarily we do train once a year with the hospitals, but RMA, Rural Metro, not so much. But that is a good point. I need to jump on that. But that is a good point. We just expect them to be truthfully honest, to do what the commanders tell them, but we need to bring them to the table and do some training with them. Absolutely, that's a good point. We had the SAFE training. We had multiple training incidents since then. I would tell you right now, the way the crews performed on that scene was great. They had no problem with execution and what they did. So I don't think it would have necessarily made a difference, but I think you hear some of the grumblings, if you will. Some of them want to get in and get a little closer, but it was such a hot scene. And we talk about hot zone and warm zone. That was a hot zone, but if you looked at it, the hot zone was right on top of you. So where's that line defined? The commander on the scene defined the warm zone at the Einstein Bagel at the command post. That was warm. But the hot zone, and I wish you could, when you think about law enforcement on that scene, the darkness, the chaos, the screaming, the automatic weapons, they did not want to be in the hot zone right there. And I can honestly tell you, the real work at the time was in those warm zones dealing with those patients. Who was in the actual building at that time? We couldn't do anything about it. That was a active scene. But yeah, I would tell you what, just defining those warm, hot zones was, and I think the commander did a great job in doing that. But it did change a little bit with the EOD. We did not. We do not have a per se rescue task force, and there's some of the things we looked at as far as those SWAT medics kind of things. We're looking at that now. But we did have a heavy rescue, the tech guys that was helping on the technical side of it. But we treated it just as what it was, a mass casualty at the scene at the time. So, yeah.
Yes. If you were given a fire department advice after everything that went down, what advice would you give them?
Train. I think it's muscle memory. I want to say, our personnel, we do it in our sleep. I mean, it's amazing the things that we can, you go to a fire call, go to an extrication, those things. I think dealing with this level of trauma, a level of chaos, and level of emotions, you don't always train for that. And if I had to give any advice to that, is peer support, is taking care of your own. I mean, really look at your personnel before, during, and after an incident, because that's where the rubber meets the road. Because they still got to go back and perform, and they still got to go home to their families. So this job is just what it is, a job. But when you go home, you still got to deal and be father, be husband, whatever you are, your wife. So if I had a piece of advice to any department, train and take care of your personnel. Invest in those resources to give them the help they need. We partnered up with UCF, our peer support, dealing with PTSD. So all those different things that we noticed, some of the people that responded, they have shown signs. They going to get additional help, or just dealing with that level of trauma. Because we see it on TV, but that was like a war zone. Just what it was. It was just that kind of intensity throughout the whole night and the days lingering. So now it's coming back up again. We got to make sure mentally, I would say that mental part, that mental aspect, you can train them all day. And I would say you can teach anybody, you can teach a monkey to do this job if you wanted to. But the mental piece, to be able to process them as individuals, and then go home to their families and be productive, is that one piece that we gotta, if I get any advice to the fire department, you gotta deal with that piece, because that is ongoing. It doesn't stop when the incident happens. It's perpetual. It keeps. We have some of those little barriers, with the bigger wheels. The county brought some of those in, so we're looking at this moving the sled device. If you saw one, we had those sled devices, you can pull them out. So we implemented some of those things. We have those things purchased. Again, it's one of those things I would say we didn't get up to the club. Absolutely. So we have purchased devices to move people along more readily at a faster pace, and we have those purchased in order. It just now is training. Muscle memory, how to bring it. As you said, something this big, I need a mass casualty. Something this big, I need to have my community partners coming together and bringing it together. But I would say the Go Fund, I didn't say this, of Orlando, I think we raised over $35 million. Not we, but the world donated, and 100% of that money went to all the victims, and all that money had been disseminated over the last 6 months. And it was over $35 million, I want to say, that went to all the victims and their families. So it was a great support, and I thank you all for supporting us through this process and having me today. So be blessed. Thank you.